This is these are the notes for the second day on chapter 22, and we're going to talk about alcohols, ethers, amines, organic compounds. So we're going to start out talking about alcohols. For each of these compounds, I want you to know the functional group. In this case, it's hydroxide, OH, the name of the compounds, alcohols, and their general structure, which would be R, OH with a little dash, and the dash means the OH is a group attached to the carbon chain. Remember, R can be any kind of carbon chain or ring. So alcohols have functional group OH. General formula is ROH. We talk about each of these chapters or sections. We're going to talk about something that's kind of a note of interest or properties. We're going to talk about denatured alcohol because this is something that you probably have seen. And denatured alcohol has something added, some type of solvent added. Sometimes it's avgas. Sometimes, depending on the situation, what they've done is this is ethanol. And at one time, ethanol was just sold, especially during Prohibition, when ethanol was available and other drinking alcohol was not. People would buy ethanol and use that for drinking alcohol to mix with other things. They've denatured it now and added a solvent to it that makes it not quite so desirable. Ethanol and CO2 are produced by yeast, produced in bread, also produced when they make alcoholic beverages. Yeast is that little critter that produces the gas and the ethanol. Ethanol is two carbons with an OH attached, and the way that the yeast produces that, they ferment the sugars that are in the dough or in the grapes or the barley or the whatever the main food is that they're put into. To name alcohols, we use a number or numbers if needed to designate the location of the OH groups. Then we say the root word, that's the number of carbons, and the ending is always OL. So the OL ending means alcohol. If there's two OH groups, then you'll do diol. If there's three, you do triol. So the ending is going to be OL. Unless there's more than one, then it's diol or triol or tetrol. So there's some practices on that on the practice pages. The other thing I want you to know, and I'll have a question on the test, be able to identify what a primary, secondary, tertiary alcohol is. Other than the OH, there's three sites. If one of them has a carbon chain, it's first degree. Two of them, second degree or secondary. And if three carbon chains are attached to that carbon, then it's tertiary or third degree. So ether. Ether is a pretty easy group to remember, and you need to have a way to remember each of these functional groups. The functional group is actually just an O or oxygen in the middle of a carbon group, or more than one carbon group. The way to remember this is that it's an O with an R on ether side. So that's your ethers. The functional group there is the O. General form is RO, R2. To name these, you find it, it's got an O in between, and it's an ether. Write the name of the group on the left, write the name of the group on the right. If they're different, say them alphabetically, like ethyl, methyl, and then the word ether. If they're the same, then you use the prefix di. So like if they're both benzene rings, diphenyl ether, because benzene is a phenyl when it's a side group. Amines. So amines have the amino group, which is NH2, one or more of the aminos. Each nitrogen only carries 3 bonds, so it can be connected to a carbon and then to an H and another H, and that's the general form NH2. Remember that nitrogen can also be substituted so that the hydrogens are substituted for R's. If you have one, then you have a primary substitution or a single substitution. If you have 2 carbon groups, then it's going to be C's on all 3 sides, and you could call that a third degree amine or double substituted amine. To name them, you're going to say the numbers where the NH2s are located, followed by the root word from the compound, and then at the end you're going to say the word amine, it might, if there's more than one, it might have a prefix di. So like diamine, triamine, if there's more than one. But again, you find where the NH2s are, say those numbers, and then the root for how many carbons there are, and then amine could be diamine or triamine if there's more than one. Carbonyl compounds. So this starts chapter 22, section 3. Carbonyl or C double bond O, and there's 4 or 5 types of compounds. We're going to talk about 5 of them that have carbonyls, and they have something else that makes them different. So the compounds are aldehyde, ketones, carboxylic acids, amides, and esters. They all have the carbonyl group. You should know that those are the ones that have carbonyl group. Good question might be, which of the following don't have carbonyl group? Then I'd put something in like ether, and of course ether doesn't have a carbonyl group. Aldehydes, first group, C the carbonyl, C double bond O. So C double bond O has an H on one side, R on the other side. I'm going to fast forward up to the ketones, and then we're going to come back. Ketones have the R's on both sides, so they have R, R, and then a double bond O. And the way to remember this is if you could think of a key. So when we think of ketone, think of key, and you've got to think of some way to remember these because there's so many different groups. The key is the same on both sides, so there's R on both sides, symmetrical. And then there's a functioning part in the middle. That's what makes the key do what it does. And the functional group would be in the middle on ketones. Now, it doesn't mean that the R's have to be exactly the same when I say symmetrical. It's just that there's an R on either side. Whereas if you go back, for the aldehydes, there's an H on one side and an R on the other. Now, aldehydes could have an H on both sides if there's just one carbon. So we'll go back to the aldehydes here, and when we name the aldehydes, the root tells you the number of carbons. So in this case, meth, if there's just one, and there's H's on either side, and then we put Al for aldehyde as an ending. You cross through, instead of methane, cross through the E and put an Al. Methanal would be one carbon and an H on either side. Ethanal would have carbon-carbon double bond O with H on one side. Propanal would again, you don't have to say a number here because the group's always on the end because it has an H. If there are groups like methane, ethane, things connected, you would say like 1-methyl propanol. That tells you that there's a methyl group connected to that first carbon. Actually, couldn't, let's see, 1, 2, yeah, we couldn't, so we'd have 2-methyl propanol, Al. So that tells you that, of course, the double bond OH is on the end, and on the second carbon over, there is a methyl group. You always start numbering from the carbonyl side, so that automatically solves where you number from. Ketones, the little item of interest here, ketones are used as solvents, paints, lacquers, all kinds of solvents, fingernail polish, acetone is a ketone, and we say them by saying the root for the number of carbons, but before that you're going to tell where from the shortest side you're going to count to the carbonyl. So let's say we had 6 carbons, and third carbon over from one side was a carbonyl. That would be, for our ending, remember we have a known, so we have 6 carbons. That would be hex, and it would be 3 hexanone, because that tells you that third carbon in is carbonyl, C double bond O. If it was one over, then it'd be third from the other side. You count the shortest side. So the number tells you where the carbonyl is. And again, we could have 1 methyl, or actually two methyl, 3 hexanone, and that tells you that one carbon over from the carbonyl, you have a methyl group. So the groups are numbered and named just the same way. That finishes it. So we have 4 different sets of notes for chapter 22. Go through your chart, learn those functional groups and the compound types, practice the naming. I've got lots of naming practice pages. There's a lot of things in this chapter, so you're going to have to put some time in and maybe make some flashcards. Use that chart as your kind of your home base for going back to memorize. Going to be a little tougher chapter. Put in some time and do well. Good luck.